similar words. And so I'm going to basically say a couple of things that what I am, and he's going to say what he is. And
yeah.
So one of the things that we're kind of similar is we both would call ourselves moral realists and believe in an objective morality. That's kind of where we're the same, I believe. And I happen to be an evolutionary moral realist. And I believe that when I say objective morality, I mean that we can objectively know facts about how things relate to other things.
Okay. So, yes, I subscribe to perhaps what some people would consider an older perspective on morality, and this is called moral realism. Or I would say moral realism. I'm sorry, I should rephrase. This is natural law theory, and natural law theory postulates that we have objective contact with some objective and external notion of moral good that we have contact with through our own intuitions and instincts about morality, and that morality essentially is acting those instincts, putting those instincts into a rational context and discovering the broader natural laws behind them. And I think this is somewhat similar to your perspective. I consider myself to be a scientist of sorts. I'm a grad student in a quantitative field, and I certainly believe in evolution. I would agree that evolution is the mechanism through which humans develop moral instincts, in the same way that humans develop logical instincts through, an evolutionary process. I think the critical distinction right now is whether moral systems and moral ideas actually point to something outside of the human mind, or whether they're confined strictly to being elements inside the human mind. Perhaps there's a disagreement there.
Right, and so I'm an axiological atheist, which is a value theory or a value science atheist. So that's how I approach things. And David, I believe, is a Catholic.
Yeah, I'm Catholic.
Catholic, right. So we also have that aspect to why possibly we could have a disagreement.
I think most Catholics are natural law people. The reigning ideas of Catholicism have been by St. Thomas Aquinas, who I don't know if he explicitly outlined elements of natural law, but he definitely left the framework for what would then be later incorporated into things like Locke and Kant and other people who believed in moral realism later on in the Enlightenment. And this has been the reigning perspective in Catholicism, and it's been much less popular in areas like Protestantism, where people tend to be a lot more skeptical about ability of human beings to understand morality outside the context of some explicit disruption of the natural order via divine revelation. So that perhaps is a cultural contrast. I think that among Christians who are more intellectual, this is probably a cultural bias, but I tend to think that natural law theory is the most popular belief among Christians with a more intellectual base. But I guess that could be cultural and my bias. Okay, so I think what we were discussing previously was so you believe in objective morality, but I guess what I don't understand is, to me, if something is objective, like if I were to say logic is objective, it means it has some kind of validity outside the human mind's ability to assert that it's the case. So if I say 1 plus 1 is equal to 2,
yeah, but math and logic are not the same exact thing. So when you say that, in other words, logic also has to a priori that it's correct, otherwise it's circular. Logic cannot prove logic. Logic is not, it's a template, like a map of the world, it's not the world itself. Logic is a mental property that we come up with. It's a thing that we do. The same, okay. And so in that I do. So if you're saying that morality is objectively like that, I would agree. But when you say that logic is a property that we can see in the world, you're saying that you take the map and can then follow the map into the world. That's not the same as saying that the logic is the world.
No. Well, the idea is, does does the universe and somehow directly embody logic as an external property to it.
But you're saying that humans are able to identify with the concept of logic what is properties in the world, objectively. And I would say humans can take the moral concept and then see it in the world what is good, because you're the same as logic. You're actually looking at the terrain and understanding the map.
This is not exactly, I think you're understanding logic as if it were simply an extension of, say, science, right? But logic can be applied to things without any observation physically of those things. A great example of this would be imaginary numbers in complex systems. Imaginary numbers have no direct physical allegory that really can be pointed to, but we can still apply logical instincts to those things.
Right.
And we can apply logical instincts and create theories about these objects.
Correct.
And then later on, we see that after we've applied this logical property, which has no allegory to anything physical we've ever seen, hundreds of years later, we see these very principles pop up in nature itself. And that strikes me as this has been a strange property that's been commented on by physicist after physicist. This does not understand why this is the case. We have this strange mathematical understanding of the universe. We follow where it goes, and then we see it pop up. Yeah, but it's not really like a map that we're following. It's essentially like a prophecy that we're commanding.
But no, not a prophecy. Because you're still understanding numbers, and numbers still have an actual relation to things in the world. They start with that premise.
Do they? Do imaginary numbers start with that premise?
Imaginary numbers are still numbers. You're still saying.
I mean, how so?
You're still, because you're saying imaginary numbers. You're making up a number, so it's still under the confines of what a number is. Right?
Show me the square root of -1, right? Like.
But -1 is presupposition of 1. It's already accepting there's a thing called 1 to have a negative of it. You're acting like it's not inventing out of thin air. You're not just coming up with, something in thin air. Even when you say Q equals something, well, then you just explain what it is. You just gave it a property.
Yeah, we completely manufacture these concepts out of a basic understanding of logical rules.
But logical rules are not in the world. There's no.
They no direct analogy to. They're basically our instincts running wild, or not running wild, but they're following a form of instinct takes, and they don't have a direct analogy to real-world properties, aside from the fact that they're based on these ideas, these logical axioms. The logical axioms are just essentially our own instincts about what should be the case. They're not based on any kind of understanding of what actually is in the world, right?
Yeah, but you said they're based on what we think is the case, which would be the case of the actual world.
I'll give you a good example.
Right? Did you not say, wasn't that your word? You said they're based on what could be the case.
Not necessarily. There's a lot of axioms.
So they're not based on what could not be the case.
I don't understand what you mean.
Right. Well, you said it could be.
I don't understand what you're saying.
But if you just flip what you said, so you're saying that they are something, right? They're based on what could be the case. That is still starting with that premise of the case. What could be, you're still projecting that map towards what could be the world. You're not just saying you're out in the thin air with nothing. You're still attaching it to a real world property.
No, not really.
What could be the case?
There's tons of these theories.
That's a probability, but probability still starts with the.
Probability.
We just said what could be the case. Is that not a probability? Right? If did you not say?
This is more fundamental. I'm just talking about logic and
mathematics. Did you not say this could be the case? They project what could be the case.
What I said is that if we have a mathematical theorem, right, that we develop in the abstract, it may be the fact that this has some analogy to physical systems, but they weren't developed with physical systems in mind, and some of them have no relationship to observable physical systems, right? That you could possibly observe, right? So it seems like you're saying that. But
let's assume that what you said is true. That there are parts of math or are parts of logic that are removed from the fact of the real world.
Yeah, I assure you that there are those.
I'm saying I don't believe in absolute morality, So the fact of you saying there's not absolute logic, even if that was true, or math, that doesn't ruin the fact of objective. Objective does not mean absolute.
What do you mean? This is a good question. What do you mean by objective?
I said the fact that that's like I said about medicine. So objective. So medicine. So I can say objectively.
No, I mean more in the abstract, like not an example of something that's objective. I mean like what do you actually mean by objective? Like
the objective to me is the ability to actually analyze and come up with a reality of something that's not limited to my own personal persuasion. If I say that you were a man, objectively that's true in the fact that it's not. The fact of me not believing anymore didn't change anything. It's objectively true. If I say that me hitting you is going to cause you, some
that's because me being a man has some validity outside your brain, right?
Right. And if I hit you, the fact of pain you experience can be quantified to be an objective reality that you experience.
We're getting super abstract here, but. This is the crux of the point, though, right? Well, no, this is good. I'm not criticizing this, but, just to keep track of this, I think this is the crux of the difference. For me, in order for something to be objective, it has to have validity outside the human mind. The reason why, when you say I'm not a man, like...
Okay, so you don't believe that logic is objective because it's not outside the human mind.
I believe that
right?
I believe.
So math, logic, those are not objective.
Well, that's the exact opposite of what I'm saying. I believe math and logic are objective because they're in contact with something outside of the human mind.
They are?
Yes.
But you said they're not a map of reality.
No.
I said.
No, but do you want me to explain this?
What I understand though, what were you explaining? So. You're saying that I'm wrong, that logic and math are basically a map of what the world is. If I say 1 + 1 = 2, that there's no number somewhere, I'm saying there's actually two things observable that make one equal things that make two of something. I'm talking about in relation to.
You're saying that all mathematics is directly or...
No, I didn't say all. Never said all. In general, so... Logic
in general, to me, seems like you're saying all, but I mean, what do you mean by in general then? Obviously, some mathematics is directly.
Most, right? Most. You think that most have no relation? Numbers have no relation to observable things.
No, but the thing is that when we're talking about mathematics, we're talking about a language, right? Now, but
the language is not outside of the human mind. That's what you said.
But this is the thing. I think there's a lot of evidence that it is, which is the weird thing, right? Like,
when you say evidence, are you not talking about the real world? Because you're saying it's not. Something has to be in the real world, outside of the mind, to be objective. But then you're saying that these things are true outside the mind because of evidence.
The way you're presenting it is that logic was developed from observing the real world. And I'm saying that's not the case. It couldn't possibly.
So formal logic was not relation that a bachelor cannot be married because the quality of bachelor.
That wasn't developed from observing bachelors. That was developed from a much more primal understanding. The truth has to be brought down to the fact of where it came from. Truth of what? Well,
truth of what, David?
That's what I'm trying to explain to you. So,
truth of something in the natural world. So it's related to.
I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I'm trying to say there's mathematical objects that were developed with no physical analogy. There was absolutely no possible way that they could be explained through a physical understanding of the universe through observation. Then later on, they were discovered. This is the central thing is you seem to be saying that we observe the natural world and we developed logic. That's not the case. The case seems to be that we've fit the natural world to a previous understanding of what logic was. Then we followed the rules of logic and discovered new things that we thought never could exist. And then later on discovered that they exist. It would be like, for instance, if we made up an English language for a unicorn, and we never saw a unicorn, and then we discovered unicorns existed. That's an entirely different thing than seeing a unicorn and developing a word for it.
axioms are grounded in the fact that the original Greek and all that logic is not grounded in the fact of not doing the real world.
That's not really what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we have evidence, to my mind, an incredible amount of evidence, that mathematics is not observationally developed in the way that you're saying.
So when we developed mathematics, before you talk about the higher theories, but the origin of mathematics, you're saying, was not in relation to the natural world. That's what you're saying? Because I would say that, to me, logic and...
It depends what we're talking about with mathematics. If we're talking about things like arithmetic, that definitely was developed in relationship to the natural world. If we're talking about things like I would consider to be true mathematics, like Pythagorean mathematics, was developed explicitly as an abstract thing that could not be found in the natural world.
But you're saying that those came first, and then mathematics came, or mathematics and numbers came, and then later ideas were developed from this source.
I think it's very difficult to compare the original impetus for arithmetic to what developed with Pythagoras in abstract mathematics.
But so you're just saying that we're able to use these systems that we developed from a natural world and then develop them beyond that? Or outside of that thinking?
I don't think that, like I said before, I believe mathematics is an instinct that was not developed from mathematics, but is actually implicitly part of the brain. Sort of like a Noam Chomsky idea of language. You've heard of Noam Chomsky?
Yes, I know Noam Chomsky.
Great. Noam Chomsky was critical for the development of language theory. It used to be people thought that language was developed purely from the fact that children observed language and then used it. But Noam Chomsky showed, and I think to my satisfaction pretty much proved, the case that that's not exactly how it works. Humans have an inborn understanding of how language should work, and then when they're exposed to language in the real world, they're just fitting it into that previous understanding that they're already biologically set up to understand. Now, that's the same thing that I think is true with logic. We're not so much observing logic and building it from the ground level, just through observation. We're fitting an understanding of the universe into a previous innate understanding of how the world should work.
Well, I'm not saying that logic is something that's only taught, if that's what you're saying. I know that science has just recently proved that children under 1 can already do some form of logical thinking.
That would support this theory.
So I'm not saying that it has nothing to do with us. I'm saying it does. It's us making a map that has to do with what the natural world is. You're just saying that it has some biological thing. Yeah, I agree. I believe in biopsychosocial. So I start with biological, then it's psychological, then it's social.
The question is, you don't believe that the universe has any kind of logical nature to it? Do you believe that, because it seems, part of what you're saying, we're getting a little bit...
That's like saying that, does the universe have something to do with math? No, math has something to do, it's the opposite. Math has something to do with the universe. In other words, it's our template, it's our map of how we can define what things are, how sizes, there's no size, thing.
This is obviously, we're getting into controversial statements about physics, right? Because this is a question that a lot of physicists have, right? Which is, what is the relationship between our physical laws and what we're seeing in the universe? And the problem is the things we can observe in the universe are only a very small fraction of the theorems that logically come out from what our understanding of logic is, and our understanding of mathematics is, right?
And our understanding of logic and mathematics still is reducible to the real world.
But I've got a question. Don't you find it odd, then, that we develop something like imaginary numbers, and then it appears, or some other...
No, because people are aesthetic. So to believe that, in other words, and also that would assume, to act like it's some sort of a magic thing, or a special... I'm saying, or a special thing. You said, is it not amazing? No. The human mind is able to think of actually lots of ideas. And it's only amazing if you limit that was the only idea we had. I'm just saying, but the truth is, we've had thousands of ideas, David, and most of them have fucking failed totally.
No, you're saying...
it doesn't matter.
I don't understand what you're saying. You're saying that all mathematical concepts develop from observation? Like
I'm saying the core of how you built it. So you built a house. The foundation of the house of morality,
yes,
of numbers, of logic, is the real world. Everything is built on top of it. Sure, we can put flags on top, and we can paint it different colors, lots of windows. We can change a lot of the aspects.
If I were to believe you, it seems to me that I would not expect, if I were to take that theory of mathematics, I would not expect physics to have developed the way it would have. I would expect that experimentalism would always lead, and theory would always follow. And I would expect that we would always have observed physical events before we develop. Well, let me finish. I would predict, based on that understanding of the universe, that we would always have had observed physical phenomenon before we had mathematics to deal with it. But every single time, it's been the exact opposite. And, well, not every single time, but the vast majority of times.
Right, so not every single time, yes, but
yeah.
So,
but this is to tell you the truth, Damien.
Yeah.
Right now, we are hitting a controversy that is alive and well in the philosophical community and in the physics community.
Yeah, I'm not saying
so we're not going to resolve tonight.
Yeah, right? I'm not saying.
But the reason why I believe my perspective is because of the history of mathematics and science itself, in which the abstract notions that have little or absolutely no analog to the physical world lead and are accepted before the actual observation. So here's a good example.
Because the beginning of science happened probably about in Mesopotamia about 5,000 years ago, somewhere between 5 and 4,000. And the beginning had to do with writing down natural observations. They were doing astrology. They're writing down what the planets are doing.
That's the birth of observational science. But I think that the birth of abstract philosophy comes from religion. The pure mathematics derives from...
philosophy doesn't come from religion.
But actually, we're talking about pure mathematics. Pythagorean, for instance, absolutely did derive from Greek religion, right?
But of course, there's a lot of religious ideas that involve stuff, and yes, I do agree that back then, though, the problem is that in our society now, we have secular and then we have religious.
Sure.
When you have Mesopotamia, 5,000 years ago, Mesopotamia had city-states. There was no... It wasn't a theocracy. It was religion. They built a big tower in the center town. There's our God. Every new town has its own God in every little area. So, and then the king was the king priest.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying. So everybody worked. The people that did astrology were religious. I mean, I'm just saying.
So we're talking about ancient Mesopotamia. I don't think we can talk about science or abstract mathematics because none of them existed in the way that they exist now. Right? But since we have had abstract theory and observational science in a controlled fashion, like post-scientific revolution or post-Roger Bacon, if you want to go back even earlier, that's probably the earliest you could take it, it has typically been, there's been an enormous amount of times when abstract theory has led, observation has followed. It's not always the case, but that leads me to believe that this obviously won't resolve the debate. You could obviously go back and attribute it. But to me, that seems like it is definitive positive evidence for the perspective that I'm saying, that we are actually in contact with something in our dealings with logic. Now,
so
we're not going to resolve this problem tonight.
So logic is not a property that we understand in the real world. You're saying.
Logic is an inbuilt instinct, like our ability to process language, right? The odd thing about logic and mathematical instincts is that we see it repeat. We make a prediction based on what we would like to see logically, and it magically appears as an observational reality, which is like nothing we've really encountered in our
lives. So you said before you don't believe in magic, but you said magically appeared. Because when I said magic...
I'm using it euphemistically.
I was too. I'm just saying, you jumped on my use of saying it's not magic, and you said...
Well, I think we can understand that we're using magic in a euphemistic sense.
Well, I'm just clarifying, because when I said it's not magic, you said I didn't say magic, but there you said magic.
Okay, I'm just trying to...
It magically appeared, yeah.
If you were trying to use magic in the way that I was trying to use magic, then I think we agree.
I was saying it's not magic, and you're saying it magically appeared. So I'm just saying.
I'm saying it's not. That there's no forthcoming.
No explaining. Yeah, no explanation.
There's no observational explanation of why this is going. This is happening, right? And I'm saying what I'm saying is that our logical capacity to process logic, it's processing what I would consider an informational signal. But like our eyes are, right?
No,
like our ears are, right?
Well, having a predisposition towards something doesn't mean that you have it. We have a predisposition to, in a sense, because of biology now, drink milk. That doesn't mean milk is good for us. We have a predisposition. We didn't used to have a predisposition for milk.
Yeah, but this is like what I'm saying is I consider logic to be like a sense. It's not invented post hoc and then supplanted over the universe, right? And I think Noam Chomsky, if we use the sort of the Chomskyan conception, I think that is probably a really good way to think about logic, right? As sort of like an extension of the language instinct. But in addition to having the capacity to communicate and develop systems, logic also has the ability to actually predict things. And when something has a predictive capacity, I tend to think that we should treat it like a sense, right? Like, I can see the car coming towards me, I predict it will hit me, right? Lo and behold, it hits me. Well, my eyes have a predictive sense, right?
If you're going to limit it to a predictive sense, then we're agreeing that that makes it objective. Is that what you're saying? The predictive sense.
That indicates that it is in contact with something that's outside of our minds.
Well, it's utilizing it. Well, I think that you could say that morality has a predictive instinct. I know that if I do a certain thing, it's going to cause harm. Thus, it's morally not good.
I don't think that. I think that to my mind, we'll get to this probably in about 5 minutes because I think we're at the end of this particular discussion. But this is the distinction. I think there's a critical distinction that needs to be made in what you just said. But I think we can say at this point.
What distinction needs to be made, do you feel?
I want to close this discussion and then we can go to that one really quickly. I think that here we've come to a difference between our perspectives, is that I believe that logic is like a sense in that it has individually valid things to tell us about the universe, independent from the observations we make with our eyes and our ears. As evidence, I supply the fact that we have, in fact, seen logical constructs with no analogy to sight or sound actually predict things that were later seen and heard through scientific observation. And you think that logic is a post hoc construction put on over observation in order to unify senses that we have basically only through direct eyes, ears, tactile sensations. Well, I think that is a legitimate disagreement, but I think that is a certain disagreement, certainly.
Well, we can observe things that are not. I say observation. We have taste, smell. We have more than just. I'm just saying that it is a actual thing in the world that we are using this map of idea. Like saying that we have a predisposition to language does not mean that there's some universal human language. If Noam Chomsky was saying that, he would be wrong. There's no.
He would say that there's.
Do you understand? There's no. Saying that I have the ability. That's like saying.
But Chomsky did talk about stuff called like universal human syntax and stuff like that, right?
Well, he's just saying that we use. If you're saying syntax, you're just saying that we're prone towards putting. Whatever. So you're just saying we're prone towards putting different types of ideas or different ways of things together. That's not giving us a language. I'm just saying that we have the properties that will allow a thing like language, a thing like logic. A child has an understanding of logic.
No, I think that is manifestly not what Chomsky said. He said that we can, given that we know about humans, we can expect a particular kind of language to form in the human mind, right? He gave the famous example. He said, well, we consider all human languages to be quite different, but that's because it's like, frogs. To us, frogs all kind of seem the same. And if I were an alien and I saw all human languages, they would all kind of sound the same to me, right? It's because we're humans that we consider all these languages to be quite different, right? But Chomsky did say that we are set up to have language in a very particular kind of way. That would be very, very different.
That's just a predisposition, which I agree, a predisposition that then makes other things possible. We have a predisposition towards being altruistic, towards understanding, what is good social behavior and what's not. A child at a very young age, before one, like 6 months is the youngest, but they did a study on, and they showed that children prefer toys that don't hurt other toys. Mm-hmm. Assumedly that they're doing it somewhat for the social benefit and somewhat for the egotistical benefit, that if a toy hurts another toy, maybe they'll hurt me. But I'm saying, but calling that a deeper level of morality, like, would you say that child, if they were to pick up a gun and shoot someone, should have to go to prison for life? I mean, or the death penalty?
I thought we were just talking about logic in this segment. We can get to morality, but do you agree with the fundamental disagreement we've had? With
that's why but you related. I'm just saying. Yeah.
I think logic is an easier.
But you just cut me off and tried to go back to saying, when you brought in Noam Chomsky, and then you asked me to explain how it relates, and so I was trying to bring it back to how it relates. So don't cut me off and act like. Go ahead. Well, I didn't try to go off something. Okay,
go ahead.
You know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying that to me, I'm not disagreeing that we don't have instincts to do stuff, but having an instinct to do stuff is not the same. Even if we're able to make some moral choices, like I said, a child does. They don't. The same with language. If you didn't give a child any language, it's not that they would all come up with the exact same language. If you put them together in little groups, they would be biological, which is the innate thing. It would be psychological, because people have different personalities, and they're also different environments. Are they given food, and these ones not? If you make these poor, make these rich, and you don't give either of them a language, they'll come out with language. I do agree with that. Just like I think they'll come out with morality. If we left them alone, they will make a moral system, and if they got developed, they will make a moral system, to me, of some kind, because we're predispositioned to do that, to be social beings. We have to realize there's other people, they have feelings. We start to construct these social worlds. Every child put in a group is going to come up with that. They're going to have to communicate, so they're going to come up with some kind of language, but they won't be equally exactly the same. But we do know that reducible, the reason they're motivated to do this is these aspects that I'm agreeing with are innate in us.
Okay, so we're in agreement that, I think that morality is implicitly more like a sense and less like a post hoc, application of our feelings onto the.
Well, I think it's both. To me, it's not either or.
I would consider it both.
I'm just saying. So to me, it's both. We have this natural, like I was saying with the kids. They didn't invent morality because they thought it was good. They had a natural sense that we have to have social cohesion if they're in a group. They don't invent language because they think, hey, it would be nice to have an aesthetic value of language. No, it has a real property. They have to share food. They have to interact. They're going to invent language.
What this discussion is going to hinge on, right, is whether these innate properties of humanity actually touch something outside of humanity, like sight does, or like hearing does, right?
Does it? Well,
sight and hearing there are innate qualities of humanity, but there are innate qualities of humanity that touch things that are outside the human mind.
Well,
real things are outside the human mind.
Yeah.
And to my mind, logic is one of those things.
So logic applies to animals. To fish.
What do you mean logic applies to animals? Logic applies to all. I mean, the.
But understanding the system. But understanding the system doesn't. Logic is subjective to humans. It's a template that we put on. A fish doesn't know. Even a monkey doesn't know. In the same way, if you were to say, does it outside of humans? Does morality touch monkeys, fish? Even religion people,
But the question could be similarly put if we were talking about any sense, right? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of animals that have no sense of hearing or taste.
Because you said sight.
Okay, great. So does sight apply to animals who are blind? Well, I guess it doesn't in some sense because they don't have that capacity. But the light waves that we're perceiving with sight are as applicable to them as they are anything else, right? But we're just seeing that dimension in there, blind to it, right?
Well, and so right,
that's really what we're talking about, right?
But we're both agreeing that there are such thing as the ability to do this. I'm not a subjectivist. I do believe that we're able to look at the real world and make things. We know that if we spend money instead of saving it, we're not going to have it later. I mean, there's actual properties that we can look at and understand these are happening and this is why it happens. I do believe it's subjective to humans. There is no moral sense that we put on animals. There's no moral sense we put on bugs. There's no moral. You're going to find something moral, in a star.
But you wouldn't say sight is subjective to animals that can see, would you?
Yeah, it's subjective to animals can see, absolutely.
So if
even like we say, but even the quality of
maybe
seeing,
I would agree with you, right? Because you would agree that if I threw an object at a blind person, it would still hit them, right? Even if they couldn't see it coming.
But the ability to sight is limited to ones that can see. Yes.
Okay, but the
ability of thinking.
The question of logic that I think maybe we don't disagree on this, but this is what I'm trying to get at, right? My idea was that logic is a capacity to observe a quality about the universe that is external to humankind, right? Like sight. Sight is the ability to observe a quality of the universe that is external to our own mind, right? Therefore, we are able to see things, and even if I'm blind, I still am in contact with something when I open my eyes.
Well, you're just saying that reality hasn't changed. That doesn't have nothing to do with sight. You're just saying that the real world is still real. The lack of sight doesn't remove reality. You're just saying the template. So in other words, if we remove logic, it doesn't mean there's not things that don't make sense. It's just that we no longer have the tool. If we remove math, it doesn't mean that we can't no more count things. That we don't have the tool anymore. It's like trying to build a house and take away the hammer.
But now it seems like you are agreeing with me that logic and morality, not morality, let's table that for a second. That logic
and math.
Let's say logic and math do have properties outside of human beings' ability to perceive them, which was mainly the contention I went into this with.
Yes, outside. Like I said, the real world...
So the real world does have a logical property to it.
Logical... Well, no, I don't agree.
That we're perceiving with logic.
We're perceiving with logic, yes. Like I said, math doesn't have numbers somewhere, but I can say there's two cameras because there actually is two things that are both cameras. They have the same properties. If I wasn't able to understand that, you said outside of humans, if say a fish saw those, they wouldn't understand it's two things, unless they understood properties.
I've already brought up the counterexample with mathematical objects that have no observational equivalent and have been introduced into logic regardless.
But but let's just say they're introduced into logic. So the beginning of logic. See, in other words, if you say something is abstract, David, you're presupposing that there's other stuff that's not abstract.
I'm not claiming everything is abstract.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that. So I don't feel like your arguing is correct against mine because you're just saying that it's not absolute. I never said it was absolute. The fact that the human mind could come up with stuff, but I'm saying...
We agree that there is a logical truth in the universe that is outside humans,
Well, how you say that, though, to me, it doesn't, there's a logical... There are things that do make sense. Like I said, a bachelor is not married, but that's...
But in this conversation, it seems that using this... From what my understanding was of your argument, was that logic's validity was completely derived from observational things. That
in other words, the core logic doesn't prove itself. The core of what makes an axiom.
I think those are two different statements, right?
But
logic may not prove itself, and it still might not have any relationship with observation, which is actually my position. I don't think that logic proves itself. That's actually, I think, manifestly false, based on what we know about incompleteness.
Right. So logic.
That was two different statements. My statement was that it is fundamentally distinct from observations of the outside world, and
how much so? Because
in the same way that our seeing is different from our hearing, right?
But they're both actual properties that are addressing things that are occurring in the world.
And logic is similar. That's my contention.
But so if it's seeing and hearing, you're just saying I have the ability to. Logic would be have the ability to understand that there are things in the world. So it's still...
And we're perceiving something with sight. We're perceiving, when we look at sight, we're perceiving the quality of the universe. That is the movement of light particles.
Correct.
When we are hearing, we're perceiving an actual physical element of the universe that is sound. When we're tasting, we're perceiving something that's very similar, but that's a chemical property. But the same thing, every one of our senses has an analogy to the physical universe that's outside of our own mind. And logic is no different. When we are perceiving how logically the universe works, it's definitely a perception, like sight is, but we are actually contacting a real physical property of the universe, which physicists and other people who are philosophers call coherence.
Well, that's one theory. There's coherence theory of truth is what you're talking about. There's also correspondence theory of truth, which is actually more accepted than the coherence is. But
this is my contention. This is not original to me, but that's what I see, and I've given you why I believe that, the evidence through how science is developed, that leads me to believe that that's the best model to use for
coherence theory of truth for logic.
I don't exactly know what you mean by coherence theory. So
the two major theories of truth is the correspondence theory of truth and the coherence theory of truth. The correspondence theory of truth is objective. That means that if I say that, like I said, you're a man, or this is the floor, or this is the TV, or this is whatever, I have to be actually talking about something that I'm talking about. It has to have that property. It can't be, a fishbowl, and I call it a TV. Okay. So the coherence theory of truth is more saying that as long as it's subjective, as long as what I'm talking
it's
about,
it's purely empirical. Coherence is it's purely abstract, and the correspondence is purely empirical. Is that the idea?
I haven't heard it explained that way, but I guess that's not probably too far from the truth. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, one of them is.
I believe in both. So, one of the ways we have to discern. We can discern truth through correspondence and through coherence.
I guess, like I said, I don't always have just a one-sided. I would say mainly I believe that most things that we do are correspondence theory of truth. But I don't say that it is invalid that some things are reducible to a correspondence theory of truth, because some things we cannot point to the real world, and we still are able to conceive of these concepts.
So if the universe,
but that's not how mainly it is. It's not mainly that. It's us understanding things. There's I think it's 58% of philosophers believe, not that it matters, but I'm just saying, 58% of professional philosophers believe in the correspondence theory of truth, which is objective, which is mainly what I hold. And then it's 28% believe in coherence theory of truth, and then the other percent are other ideas. But the point is, most of them agree, and I think that really, in a sense, most of the world, how we understand it, things we're talking about, the best way to do it is actually to understand what you're corresponding to. Because
but the exact breakdown of most is not really germane to my point. The only thing I was saying was that the coherence does exist, right? That's the point. That it does exist as something independent and true, and a mechanism. The perspective breakdown of how much of any of our beliefs are based on one or the other is, interesting scientifically, I suppose, but it's harder to talk about. And in that sense, maybe we agree that that our logical instincts are in contact with this external concept of coherence, right? That's in the universe.
Well, normally I would say it's actually the correspondence theory of truth that we're relating logic to. But yes, I do believe there are aspects that involve the coherence. I could agree with that.
Okay, so
I would say most are not, but yeah.
It seems like then we agree that logic does have some external to the human mind objectivity, right?
Well, I think most of it does, because it's relating to the natural world for me.
Sure.
So I think some of it is reducible to the human mind. Coherence theory of truth to me would be something that is reducible to the human mind and not in the external world. If you're talking about external world, then you're talking about correspondence theory of truth. If you're talking about coherence that does not require the external world, then you're talking about subjectivism that has to do with...
No, but that's the precise point, right? The idea is that there seems to be objective truth outside of what we can directly relate to the real world. And like I said, the evidence, I believe, for that is just look at the development of science.
But
right?
the development of science is not because they don't look at the natural world. That is the exact opposite.
No. I'll reiterate it. It's the order in which this has gone, right? If we were to believe that the only way of developing true statements was essentially through observation, I would always expect experimental understandings of the universe to precede the development of correct theory. But this has not always been the case. In some senses, it's almost been the exact opposite.
Well, people come up with theories, but a theory usually has some conjecture from the actual world, or some inference that they perceive from the actual world. So when the fact that you can say that a theory is successful, well, a lot of theories were not. So you throw 10,000 darts, one of them hits, that doesn't make that thing somehow special, or that we're able to know things without knowing. It just means that one idea that someone came up with. Science has progressed purely because it has stopped being subjective and been more objective.
No, but this is...
In every era...
I feel like we've gone to circular nature, right? Because you're saying that everything that isn't directly verifiable is, like, physically verifiable through senses is subjective? Like, and everything that's...
No, because some things... No, I did not agree to that, no. Because I told you we can come up with objective facts in the reality. We can say if we don't take medicine, I'll be sick. I take medicine...
That's based on a... that's based on a understanding of things that happened observationally.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I would say that's an example of...
Morality's no different.
I'm trying to understand your position.
So does morality happen without observation? You're saying morality happens, no observations occurring.
The question was whether morality... So how we got this... The question was whether morality is objective, right?
I agree.
I agree that...
We both think it is. I think we were erring on...
I think what we mean by objective. To me, in order to be objective, it has to be valid outside the human mind.
So then...
Flatly so. That's the measure of objective. If it is valid outside of the human mind to model it, then I think I'm just saying a definition.
Well, so but I would just, for me, I wouldn't say it the way you said it. I would say that for something to be valid, it has to be outside of a single human mind. Because if you say that love is not a quality, right? But it's still there.
That seems
love
weird
is that's like saying depression. So depression doesn't exist. So depression doesn't exist if I can't see it out in the real world.
That seems like saying like if I believed a giant unicorn was sitting in the center of this room, that would be subjective. But if 100 people all thought they saw a giant unicorn in the center of the room, that would be objective. It makes no sense to me. Right? Like, how can multiple people believing in something suddenly make it true?
No, it doesn't make it true. I'm just saying that it requires...
make it objective.
Well, I was saying that... No, I was just saying that things that are outside the single human mind, the person's choice, the person's emotions, things that we can identify... And there was, like you said, seeing a table. If I see a table, that doesn't 100% prove of it. But the fact that 1,000 people can keep testing and it keeps being a table, then it's a table.
But we agree on that case because the table literally exists outside of our minds.
But like I said, there's things in our minds, like the fact that we have emotions and stuff that are not realities in the world, but they are reality to people. We can test and we can know that everybody in a sense in the world experiences, say, happiness, love, anger. That we don't actually see properties of anger. We don't see properties you're talking about behavior. But that's
behavior, okay.
But behavior you're attaching to an idea in the mind.
So when you say something is objective, you only mean that it's shared by a lot of people. That perception is shared by a lot of people?
Well, no, we can say that it's not limited. I said it's not limited. If something is subjective is if it's limited to you. In other words, if only you felt love and the rest of the world did not feel love, that would be love would then be a subjective thing. The fact that we can see love happening in multiple people, regardless of their persuasion.
Are we talking about love, what love expresses, or we're talking about the phenomenon?
The phenomenon that you feel.
I think any materialist or even any moral skeptic would totally agree that love exists as a phenomenon, right?
It's a phenomenon in the human mind.
Okay, great. But I don't think anyone would say like love the phenomenon is like love the phenomenon objectively exists.
Yeah,
obviously.
Well,
love the phenomenon. Love the expression though is totally subjective. Well, from the conception I'm getting from you, it's totally subjective, right?
Well, who you love could be subjective. But the fact that you have the capacity to love and that you desire to love, that most people do, it is a universal.
So you think
thing.
It's
it's objective. That it's a universal characteristics of human beings to desire love, to desire happiness, and to experience fear and experience anger. These are not things that we have to learn.
When we say that love is has objective properties, we mean that is just simply the collective tendency of the majority of human beings.
That's fine.
And if it no longer the objective tendency of the majority of human beings, that it would no longer be objective.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
Okay, so your use of objective is very different from my use of objective, right? For instance, I believe in objective truth, but that it means that I don't care if 99% of the people believe that something is the case. It may not be the case, but in your conception, something could be objectively true because 99% of the people in the world believed it, and therefore it would be an objective fact in that sense, right?
No, I didn't say believe. You added believe. I didn't say believe it.
Feel. How about
experience it? So
experience. Yes.
Experience is not the same as belief. I'm saying it's objectively true that all humans experience, happiness and anger or fear. All of humans throughout their life are going to experience fear. It doesn't matter your personality, your religion, your persuasion.
Yes.
You're young, old. It doesn't matter what time in your life you're going to experience fear and happiness at some time in your life. It's just that's an objective fact. There's no property in the world we can go point to and go, that's fear. That's happiness. Although we can objective to say certain behaviors will produce fear.
Your definition was that it's just the majority of the species, right?
I said if they're all experiencing it. If you said, would it no longer be objectively true, or would it be subjective, if only David felt fear? Yes. If no one else in the world felt fear but David, to me it would be subjective.
Okay.
It's not saying that you believe in fear. I'm talking about your ability to have it if it's limited only to you.
I guess this is where I think that we have a very different view of morality, right? Because when we go to things like truth and logic, I think we would agree that even if there's no one else in the universe, my experience of logic could be right or wrong. And it wouldn't depend on how many people or whether this was a species-wide phenomenon or not, right? It would not depend on that. When we talk about morality and love and emotion and your use of the word objective, it totally depends on the number of people that experience this and the exact preponderance of this emotion inside the species. So we're talking about two different... Do you need to take a break here?
No. I just wanted to read what objective says from the dictionary. Sure. It says, objective, of a person or a judgment not influenced by personal feelings, opinions, considerations, or representations of fact.
Okay.
So
that's a light definition. There's like 5 definitions of objective.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying it's the only one. I'm just saying that you're saying that how I'm using it. I'm just saying I'm not using it outside.
I'm perfectly willing to use your definition. I'm just trying to make a distinction. So, for instance, I would say that logic has an additional quality that other things you've listed as objective do not have. Namely, that if one person can be right logically, even if everyone else's logical things go the exact opposite way, right?
But they couldn't invent a form of logic that did not relate to anything and then say, because I like it, because I believe in it, because I created it, it is now a logical rule. It is required to be validated and internal to the world. It's not outside of that. It's not... Otherwise, it's illogical. I mean, if there's no difference, if you're saying one person could create it, then you're just saying that. So I could personally.
I think we're agreeing on this,
right? I can't personally invent a new logic and say this is it, and how does it relate? And I explain. You just have to understand it.
I think we're agreeing on this, right? I think we agree that logic has some, like the previous section, logic has some quality that exists in the outside universe that it points to. And by comparison to that, we can either see that it's good logic or bad logic. But the question is, I just don't see how anything, these other things, really, under your understanding, right? Like, it's just, to me, like, I personally believe, and I'm going to try to make the case for the reason that morality is more like our logical instinct and less like our instinct for, I don't know, like personal emotions, right? Like I have a particular like for the color green, for instance, and a dislike.
Well, I agree. Morality is not like liking the color green. I'll definitely agree with that. I don't.
Okay, but
why? Because morality is simply a system of understanding how to navigate social interaction. That's what it is to me.
So
to me, like if you ask me, I will tell you that to me, there's no such thing as a morality that is a real morality that has anything to do with just you. In other words, there's nothing David can do to me, can do to himself that is immoral. You can pluck your own eyeball out, cut your hand off, whatever you want to do to you. It's only when you do that to me, you cut my eye out, you cut off my hand, that social interaction, that morality is the... So morality is an objective thing because there's an objective reality of how we treat each other and what that produces. Because of the consequence of what it produces.
But this seems like, at this point, you're saying that morality is developed by society because many societies would allow me to do just that to you and might even apply.
Well, no, because I'm saying the fact that they allow you to does not make it moral. If you, in other words, but it goes back to consent. If I give consent, you're saying that if you're saying in a system where I say it's okay, David, to hurt me, and you hurt me, then it's not immoral because I allowed you to hurt me. But that is understanding that you respected my right to give you permission. If you do it against my permission, that's the moral wrong.
But that's your perspective. This is not a perspective that's been held in many other societies, right? Like this has not been that morality you just laid out is a morality that is very specific, especially the emphasis on consent. It's very specific to this time and this place in the world. It's not very universal. And so it seemed previously, like you were saying, that the universality of these emotions was what gave them their objective validity.
Yeah.
Well, the morality you just outlined does not have that universality. So I do not see how you can extend your definition of objective, not mine. I don't see how you can apply your definition of objective to that morality.
Well, no, I'm saying we can evaluate what is moral. The fact that someone does, that's like the fact that someone doesn't take medicine doesn't mean that medicine doesn't heal people. If you act in a certain way, you will get more social well-being, no matter what culture you're in. Well, and as far as saying that cultures don't do morality, well, actually, the truth is they all start to do morality. Really, it has to do with the more people you have, the more impetus you have actually to try to have some moral system.
But so you're saying this? I feel like I'm going to be going. I'm going to try the exact same logical thing with Jersey. As soon as you say that it's moral because it leads to more societal well-being, I'll ask you if I can essentially destroy people who are not useful to society. No. Right?
No.
Why can't you?
Because I never said that they had to be useful. In other words, like there's a thing called moral disgust that happens. It's psychological.
Sure.
Do you know about
it? It's a psychological feature, yes.
Oh, so you know about it. Good. So,
yeah. Jonathan Haidt wrote a lot about moral disgust. The problem is it's not exactly... it's a much broader feature than what most modern ethics emphasizes, right? People get moral disgust with a lot of things that we might not consider... for instance, a good example of this, people get moral disgust when they see homosexual sex, right? Now, a lot of people think, well, that moral disgust is incorrect, right? So... It can't just break down the moral disgust.
Well, because to me it goes back to things are biopsychosocial. Biologically, we have a fight or flight response, and so when we feel things like moral disgust, it comes from the same kind of a thing that it has to do with the mind. The fact that we are prone towards understanding what behaviors allow us to navigate the thing more effectively. But then, of course, it's psychological. Different, as you said, different people are turned on by different things. They have, so people are prone, then they're social. We're taught to think this is disgusting.
No, that's the mechanism for which this occurs. But the question is like, to me, like...
But what I'm saying, we do need to understand the ontology of what we're talking about to understand if we're going to attach it somewhere. If we're going to say, this belongs here, this doesn't belong. You say it doesn't belong, in the mind, or it doesn't belong in society, or it doesn't belong, then we need to know what it is. So I do think it does matter that we understand the properties that we're talking about.
Well, I guess. I mean, to my mind, right, like, when you say objective, the way you previously used it implied that there had to be some kind of universality, right?
Well, there is a universality, yes.
But then you
there's a universality of the world.
Then you laid out a morality that fundamentally is restricted to a very recent understanding of bodily consent, right?
But that's a separate issue. Bodily consent is understanding the person. We all understand. All morality happens, for instance, with the person.
If you could better, like, this is the question, like, so many of these things, it always seems like it's this moving target, right? Like, what is the morally good state? And we say, well, it's morally good to achieve this end, right? And then we keep on backing it, and I go, well, why is that end morally good? And we're like, that's morally good because of this end. And it just keeps on, the goal keeps on running away. But the only actual moral calculation you do is to establish the primary good. Once you establish the primary good, then everyone agrees that you can use science to discuss how to achieve that. Mm-hmm. But the difference between moral realists and moral subjectivists is their understanding of the establishment of the goal. Mm-hmm. If you're just saying that, well, it's an objectively good way to complete the goal, everyone agrees with that. Subjectivists agree with an established goal having an objectively best way to achieve it. Moral realists agree with that. That's not a controversial statement. The question is whether there are certain goals that are better than other goals. And you've heard my debate with Jersey Flight. It's emphasized just this distinction. If every time we ask what's morality, we attribute it to some goal, all we're doing is just pushing the discussion of morality back and back and back in additional space, right? The only time when we actually have a discussion of morality is when we examine the goal itself and not justify it in terms of something else.
In your question or your point you're trying to say in relation to me is what?
You're saying what is the ultimate thing that makes something moral, mm-hmm. right? Like, so, I think some people say, like, societal well-being or whatever, right? Like
I would say that the psychological well-being of the individual, and then the social well-being of where the individual is reacting.
But it's just the individual?
Well, it's both. It's every individual. In other words, morality is not a bunch of things. It's every individual doing something with the other individuals.
I'm asking first of all, I have to understand, do you agree with this idea that the real moral discussion is that what is the moral good, right? The mechanisms by which we achieve that are obviously objective. They are scientific in their nature, and we're both scientific realists, I think. Mm-hmm. So that's uncontroversial. The question before us is whether there are certain goals that are just better than others, or we can say that this goal is the right one, and this goal is like the wrong one, right?
But once, to me, you make a goal, you're saying that we can establish in the mind a map of the properties of the world. Because a goal would say, I look things, a goal, you can't, in other words, invent a goal out of thin air. Your goal is attached to something. You're tethered to this presupposition idea. The presupposition, like, in other words, a goal would require that you're going back to the real world to establish it. But your goal is as the map of how to navigate the real world. So that is what I'm saying. Morality is a map that navigates social interactions.
I'll reiterate something I said in Jersey's discussion too. There have been objectively different goals, right, among human societies, right? The Nazi goals and the humanist goals were different goals. They weren't just different mechanisms to achieve. Okay, so that seems manifestly true, right?
Yeah, definitely it's different
goals.
Okay,
but then you're saying
it's objectively true that it was different goals, not subjectively.
Okay, great, but in that case, I don't see how logically you can make a distinction, right?
What? Which goal was better?
Yeah, I mean, like it certainly can't be a logical argument, right? Because if you're a different goal, like how is obviously if your goal is like the betterment of human beings, all human beings across the board, which is, and this is a very rough paraphrase of the humanist objectives, and the Holocaust is bad. But if your goal is the racial purification of the earth, then maybe that's the logical thing. Like it's not that we have to say ultimately is that
his whole system wasn't built off reality. It was built off fascism, and fascism is anti-science. He was only science in the fact of trying to support his paganistic and Christian ideas. His hating of Jews had to do with Christian, his Catholic bringing.
Hitler's disgust with Jews was almost purely racial in nature, which has nothing to do with Catholic anti-Semitism was religious in nature.
But I'm not saying he was just Catholic. He started out Catholic and Christian, and he couldn't use it to his ends. I think his ends was more important than his actual religiousness. But then he went to paganism, and he actually didn't even want to stick to that pro-German paganism.
If you believe
he started inventing paganism like out of the blue.
But we're getting onto this digression. The question is, you recognize that these are different goals, right?
Yeah.
So okay, great. But the question is, like, I don't see. Certainly, you can't just say like, well, I mean, I don't think you can say like, how would you go about proving that one goal is better than the other based on what you're saying, right? Like, it seems to me that at some point you have to say, well, you have to make some statement that this goal is the endemic, like this is the true goal of humanity, right? And I don't think that can really be based on some kind of scientific calculation.
It's a psychological one. We understand that humans want to live. We understand that I want to live, and thus I'm a human. You're a high-thinking thing. You have rights just like I do. Rights
presupposes the goal of
human interaction.
That's circular. You can't say that the goal of human good is because of human rights, and human rights is based on the goal of human good. That's totally circular, right?
But okay, just everything can be reduced to circular. The empiricism, scientific,
If we're being strictly correct, we should just say this is our axiom, and it's just there, right? I think that's what we're both doing, right?
But would you not say that some axioms are more effective towards what you're trying to do, and some are less effective? Correct? Some things work better. It's a tool. Some things work better for their purpose. And if you have two of the same kind, like say you have two medicines, and they both do something.
You see, this is totally. If you're going to say that the axiom of assuming humans have moral worth, that the axiom that the good of humanity is the goal is useful because the good of humanity is the goal. That to me it's
a social interaction. Your flourishing, your ability to do stuff, actually does matter by you understanding others. Because if you don't, then you don't. When we work together, in other words, science can progress because now we work together. We actually don't even limit it to the United States. We do the whole world. The more we do stuff in a communal sense and less in a individual sense, we flourish. This, I mean, in the long run, this is true in general. We don't. So the morality to me, I'm just saying, just morality to me is no different. It is an objective property that we do objectively flourish when we do this, and we do objectively suffer.
Every time you use objective, you're just looping the goal again, right? You're saying like we should have the objective of human good because it leads to human good.
It leads to human flourishing. Good leads to
it's the same. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. You're saying A is good because A is good because A is good because A is good. You're all in the end of the day, you're just saying is A is objectively good. Period. I think that's what we need to do. Don't get me wrong. That's just where we start. But there's something behind what you're just saying. right? All you're saying is that the humans are an end to themselves, and that's objectively true. You're almost saying objective in my sense. You're saying it's just the case, right? That this is the external thing.
Well, I don't see how morality can be, in a sense, anything other than just it is reducible to human relations. If there's one person on the earth, just one person, there's no one else. You're not doing things that are moral. You're not doing things that are immoral. Well, it requires. So, yes, I'm saying human well good because we can't get outside of that. If you go up on a mountain by yourself, David, don't interact with anybody, you've done nothing immoral. Unless, of course, you do stuff that burn the hill and it goes down and hurts people in the town or adds smoke in the air and pollutes the air. But that's because, once again, that you're interacting with other people.
You're stating what your morality is. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Your morality is that human beings are an end to themselves, right? And then you're just saying that everything logically extends from that, and I totally agree with it, and that's an uncontroversial statement. But I don't think anyone would disagree with that. The question is,
some people would, because they would think that...
people would agree conditionally. They would say, if I agree that human beings are inherently good, then it is objectively contrary to this goal to do X.
I don't think people are inherently good. I don't agree with that.
I didn't say that. I said
if we believe they're inherently good.
Let's say I'm a total nihilist. I can still logically agree with the statement that's conditioned on the fact that human beings are an end to themselves. It is therefore objectively wrong to burn down the world or whatever you were just putting forward their scenario about burning the woods. That would be a logical statement, even if I didn't believe in any morality whatsoever. Like, it's just manifestly true based on logic. The moral component of that was in your initial assertion that human beings were an end to themselves, which is an axiomatic assertion, right? There's something beneath it. And your attempts to go beneath it what I've heard essentially is that it's that way because it is that way in different ways, right? Like,
well, as I was saying, a human sight is an objective fact, but humans don't see, radio waves. We don't see infrared. But there are some animals that can do things that we can't. We don't hear on all levels. But just because our lack of hearing on every level doesn't mean we objectively don't hear. But there's actually lots of sounds, including light, like you talked about seeing. I mean, light's not white. The sky's actually not blue.
But there you go. That gets me to my own point. I think you're coming to a point where you're saying that we are appealing to something outside of the human mind, regardless of whether we can see it or not. Just like the infrared light, just like the objects in the universe that our sight contacts with, right?
But that doesn't mean there's morality in the external world to me. There's not morality is a proper me of saying how I navigate, like I said to me, a map, how I navigate social interactions.
Okay. Maybe we should take a break here and come back and discuss the two other topics I wanted to discuss. This is easy to break up. Okay, I hope everything is set up right now. So in the previous section we discussed the very abstract perspective on morality and the meaning of objectivity. Probably very abstract. At this point, we're going to transition to a more practical perspective on how our views contrast. I think perhaps starting with history, starting with concepts of what we consider to be moral issues in a very practical sense, maybe regarding family, and then perhaps perspectives onto the future and things there. So I think we were starting with a discussion of, I guess how morality has played out in human history. And perhaps you could explain your view of that, and I'll explain mine.
Okay, well, we were talking about how violence and war, and I was saying that before 12,000, there's no signs of war. There's no signs of mass human interaction with each other. After 12,000, we start to see, especially in Australia and in Africa, the use of weapons against other humans.
I think you're bringing up a larger point, too. I think the core philosophical point that you were trying to make was that the only stable society is essentially a peaceful one. Would that be true to say?
Is the only stable, and I would say...
I ascertain that was your argument, but I could be misparaphrasing you.
Yeah, I don't know if I say it exactly like that, the only...
Sure, but
I would say that stable societies are more effective when they are peaceful, especially if they're peaceful within the society. Yes, I would say that.
Great. Yeah, I would certainly disagree with this characterization. I think that we obviously are not going to be able to present archaeological evidence. I don't think either of us are archaeologists, but I consider that wars pretty much punctuated most of human history if we have a broad enough definition of war. And I think a lot of the problem with this study in the past has been that we've had a concept of war that's fundamentally been derived from what wars look like among farmers and larger civilizations, which means large groups of people killing each other. But if we see things in modern small societies and modern hunter and gatherer societies, we see that although mass war, like you were saying, is not particularly common, they are nonetheless incredibly violent societies because there's a constant low level of violence going on among these societies, regardless of the fact that they're not large enough to sustain sort of the more classical idea of war. And because of that, I think that if we have a broad definition of violence and war, we see a human society that's sort of punctuated by conflict. And it's something that, although I think in the modern world, over the last 1,000 years, approximately, maybe even 2,000 years, there's been a tendency to have less violence as time goes on. There's nothing that's necessarily promising that inside human nature. And depending on the circumstances, we could easily go back to having a great deal of war. Or not have very much war, depending on the specific situations that arise.
Right, and that's what I think that war is. You say our nature. Our nature is to survival. So our nature wouldn't be to do stuff inherently on a wide scale that is damaging or threatening to us. I think that we engage in war, like I said, even at 12,000 years and 10,000 years, has to do with climate change, the fact of resources that limit. And war today is about resources, land, it's about oil, it's about water rights, it's about
I disagree with
diamonds. That. I mean, most war is not just for the aesthetic value of seeing humans die. Because even like I'm an atheist, and some people believe that religion has made all wars. I find that to be ridiculous.
There is almost no evidence to support that.
No, I'm saying I don't agree with that. I think that even if the fact you could say that people that are religious engage in wars, I still don't think that means that's the cause. Now, I think that the same thing that I would say is also the fact that people have wars doesn't mean they do it because they like violence. They like to live in a state of constant threat. I think that people do things for an end. They do things with a goal. Wars. The reason you fight a war is not, I hope it will last forever. The thing is, I hope I win to get A, B, C, D, whatever. It's goal-oriented.
I might even agree with that. I mean, but, like, I would actually maybe not even disagree that if there were zero scarcity, we might not have any wars. But I think that's only an abstract idea. Right. There always is the wars over ideology, which don't directly pertain to scarcity.
Well, and I'm not saying that no one's ever been killed over beliefs. They have, but even when you kill over beliefs, the goal is usually to make the belief stronger. So there's an end thing. It's not like aesthetic. I'm just saying that when the human. I think it's wrong to say that humans do violence because of the love of violence. We do violence as a means to an end. It does something for us. I'm also not saying that there's no violence that happened because we like violence. Of course, there's always outliers that do things for no reason at all. But that's not the universal normal why people do things. The one reason people do things, violence, is usually to achieve something else.
Yeah. I would say the main reason that people choose to do violence is because it's a question of controlling the future, where they want to have the future be a certain way. Other society wants the future to be a different way, right? Whether it's a cultural idea being dominant, whether it is simple. I actually might disagree. I think it's usually not so much resources in this really explicit sense, right? Usually it's something like, well, we want our political order to be extended across this continent, and we don't want your political order to be extended across this continent. Now, resources are involved in that, and that's what people are fighting over, but that's, at least modern wars have been basically, essentially linked to that more than anything else.
Well, they're about land, so it is resources. Hitler wanted to have all kinds of land so that he could have his ideologies, strong by the ability to obtain resources. I mean,
I guess this question is, was land a means to an end or the end in itself? To me, that would be just a means to an end, right?
Well, the war was the means to get the land. The ability to
or
dominate
control over the people.
Well, yeah. Well, you got to do the fear to control the people. So yeah, especially if you're going to take.
I actually think that Hitler probably. I guess land and people are more or less interchangeable in Hitler's mind, right? But I wouldn't say I don't think that if you just gave Hitler an empty continent and okay, here's all the land you ever wanted, right? It's not like that's what he wanted. He wanted to create a society that is organized under his ideas. That's. To my mind, that's what he wanted. And the land was there. What made it interesting was the fact that there was the civilization and people who were built on the land, So, control, especially for Hitler and Stalin, was the main issue.
Right, but even if you say land, you want land that's fertile, you want land, so it is about resources. You want land that has minerals, you want land that has things to keep the society going. So if you said, here's a continent with tons of oil, tons of stuff, tons of trees, I think Hitler would have absolutely taken it.
But it would have been fuel for his greater end.
Correct, right? but it's still the resources that he needs for his greater end.
Great, but what I'm saying is the greater end was the societal political order he saw in the Third Reich and in the racially purified world that he wanted to bring about. Right? I hate to use the word purified, but that's how he would describe it. That's what he wanted to bring about. The land itself was a means to accomplish that, and I guess we're kind of splitting hairs here. But I think that, if you look at it in terms of resources, it's always difficult because you have all of these wars that are pursued, and they destroy more resources than they actually garner of people, right?
Well, but you're just saying the truth that war is not really that effective, which I agree. War is not really that effective.
It's not effective if your goal was resources.
Well, it's not even effective if your goal is to build a cohesive society, because war actually undermines people's trust. Didn't people try to kill Hitler? The fact of you trying to do that through force actually motivates force. It doesn't. So the thought
I think if Hitler's idea was to create a unified continent-spanning Europe that was unified under his direct military leadership and purified and cleansed. Oh God, all these terrible words. And the Jewish people were exterminated. War was absolutely an effective way to achieve that. There would be almost no way to achieve that without war, and he almost did achieve that with war.
Yeah, but let's just say that's like the Roman Empire. Just getting power, the fact that you're able to dominate.
Slightly different example, right? Because the Roman Empire was a very different beast than.
Well, but I'm saying they're both trying to get power by war. They're both using war as a tool to get power, and they both, as you said, achieved power. But what I'm saying is, when you do it with that means, it will always end up eating you up like it did. The Third Reich would have ate itself. The fact that you produce these war people will then actually go against the society you're trying to sustain.
That's a good question. I wonder how sustainable the Third Reich would have been.
I don't think it would have been very sustainable at all. I think that because it's like once he would have achieved it. Let's see.
No, probably would have lasted as long as the Soviet Union, I would say. I don't know. It depends on the society that's left over. How much in this hypothetical society where Hitler wins the war, I mean, who's left? Is America still on the scene, or is he just like spanning the world, right?
Well, but I think even like you said about the Soviet Union wasn't one linear idea that stayed the same. Stalin is not the same, as Lenin.
And Bolshevism was central idea.
I know, but I'm just making a statement. The Lenin is different than Stalin, and then after that, Gorbachev.
Well, I'd say more or less they had the same objectives, just different means to achieve that, right?
But what I'm saying is they still didn't do the same thing. Hitler's thing was they would stay the same. I guarantee it would not have stayed his ideas would not have stayed the same. Even this thing like Lenin and Stalin, they came from Marx, but Marx probably wouldn't have agreed with what they did. So in a sense, it wouldn't have mattered what his goals were. I guarantee it wouldn't have stayed that way.
Well, my guess. I mean, he certainly would have destroyed every Jew in Europe if he had won the war. That's unquestionable. And probably most of the other ethnic European.
Well, and then that's another problem too, is that it wasn't just the Jews. Even if there was no Jews for him to do, he also felt that way about the Poles, about African Americans. He felt that way about multiple people.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exact. For Hitler, it was special. Jews were.
Well, I know they were special. What I'm saying, but even if you would have took that out, he had more design than just them.
And he probably would have achieved all of those designs if he had won the war.
But I'm saying that that design, though, would have never been able to follow through fruition through time. It never would have.
I mean, I guess. I mean, like, it's like anything. I mean, I ultimately believe that these objectives are futile. But all I'm saying is that war, depending on what you're trying to achieve, it can be a means to achieve that, and I kind of lost my train of thought. We were trying to discuss practical morality.
Well, yeah, but
so let me get this way.
Okay.
So I've noticed this in a lot of people who come from a progressive atheist direction, where they believe that morality, most of their moral objectives, they have this very, very, I don't want to say faith, because you'll probably immediately dislike that term, but they seem to have this unshakable faith that history is going to sort of unfurl in this way, that it's going to tend towards peace, and it's going to tend towards this progressive notion. And I think that's probably the primary way we disagree. And they see that, they would say, like Hitler, that like, well, the goal is ultimately futile. Whereas I could easily imagine a world where Hitler accomplished his goals. And it was really just the specific circumstances of history that, made him not fulfill those goals, right?
But I see Hitler as no different than the idea of kings. The idea of kings, what one time ruled everywhere, but the progression of time is that there will be no kings.
Yeah, that's the idea. To me,
there will be no kings. Eventually, I say in the future there will be a time when there is no such thing as monarchies, or they'll be like the England, where they're so, removed from any power that they're meaningless.
Now this is difference. I think there's always going to be. I think that we're going to call them different things, but they'll be autocrats. They'll be autocrats as long as there are humans in our current form. There will be autocrats in our society.
What do you mean by that? You mean just that there'll be people that seek power, or
and that wield it unilaterally? Yes. Well, that's a quality of humanity that we're never going to see the end of, and we should always be aware of that, right?
But I think that kings or people like Hitler, where you have an ultimate, type of authoritarian totalitarianism. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be. Every time you put that up, the people are under it are going to push it down. That's just,
but it's the same thing with this cycle, right? There's always going to be new dictators. They're always going to fall. They're always going to. Like I said, in our current 1,000 years, 2,000 year period, I agree there has been a tendency for these autocracies to diminish.
So you're disagreeing that basically we have, just like the fact that we have the UN now, the fact that we have the World Health Organization, we are moving towards more communal things. We have the internet where we actually share ideas. Governments used to only share technology with each other. Now they share it more with the world. Mm-hmm. I mean, our whole thing is, so I don't understand how you could say that you see that we're not becoming more progressive and more global. I would say we absolutely.
I mean, things are changing, certainly.
Well, I used to be more tribal. I'm saying.
I thought I just conceded this point. I thought I just said that in the last 2,000 years we have seen a diminishment of autocracies and a diminishment of large wars.
Right, but I was just saying that your central point was that things are not in the future going to become more progressive.
Yes, that is precisely what I'm saying. I think that is what has occurred due to a few specific historical manifestations. That
the Enlightenment, for one.
No, it precedes the Enlightenment. This trend, trend towards fewer wars and more consolidated power precedes the. It precedes the. The Enlightenment, in some sense, is a consequence of that diminishing tendency towards war and the consolidation of. I'm taking a very large, 1,000-year perspective, right? The Enlightenment was brought about by these huge consolidated.
I'm just saying, but ever since then, the fact of thinking over just brute violence. The Enlightenment brought in more technology, more willing to understand science, more willing to be rational as opposed to irrational. I don't think they solved all those problems, but certainly it was that when you look to the Enlightenment, you're looking to people that said, let's figure out how to solve these problems, or at least put a Band-Aid on them. How do we start doing this?
That was not unique in history, though. That occurred. The Renaissance that occurred in Roman times. This is the Enlightenment is probably it made a definitive change in the fact